40 years ago this week was the first wrestling show there. 26 years ago this week, February 5th, 1988, one of the most historic shows in WWE history. This was the first edition of the main event, which was not a show on Ion Television like it is now with a bunch of jobber matches. This was a live special on NBC, featured the WrestleMania 3 rematch between Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant for the WWE Championship. Still the greatest number of viewers to watch pro wrestling on network television. 33 million people. I can't even wrap my head around that number. 33 million people tuned in to watch at least parts of that match. Also, it was the first appearance of the new Winged Eagle Championship belt that is still to this day my favorite pro wrestling title of all time. And I know many of yours as well. Interestingly, in the pre-match backstage promo with Hogan, because on these specials back in the day, like Saturday Night's Main Event and all that, a wrestler would make his entrance, and then Vince McMahon on commentary would throw it back to Mean Gene in the locker room. They'd interview his opponent, then the opponent would come out. So they go to a backstage promo. I think this was after Andre was already in the ring, and Hogan's back there with Mean Gene. He's still wearing the old 1986 Hogan championship belt, which was smaller. But when he came out for the match, like magic, the Winged Eagle appeared around his waist. It always sticks out in my mind. It was so obvious those promos were pre-taped many, many hours earlier in the day, probably. But why nobody thought, okay, he's wearing the 86 belt in the promo, but he's coming out with this brand new title belt. That's a little weird. So anyway, that was a historic match. I mean, again, this was the match where they did the evil twin Hebner angle. It's also the only championship reign that Andre the Giant ever had, which was brief. It was uneventful, but at least he could, people can say Andre was the champion at some point. This was Earl Hebner's debut in WWE. His brother Dave was already a referee. Earl was working for the NWA. They poached him over from the NWA, and the way they did this was great. I mean, it was a great angle. It really, really was, because certainly when Earl came out to officiate the match, nobody knew the difference. You'd have to really know the Hebners to be able to tell one from the other. And watching on television, I'm sure most, or in the building, because you're not that close to the ring, nobody knew the difference. Dave was always a little bit heavier than Earl, but the storyline is that before the match, Earl, I guess, I don't know, he tied him up and put him in the stationery closet. I don't know what he did to Dave, but Earl officiated the match. Earl was paid off by the $1 Million Man. When Andre got Hogan down and went to pin him, Hogan got his shoulder up at the count of 2, maybe even the count of 1, and the referee just ignored it, and he counted 3. Referee's decision is final. Title changed hands. Hulk Hogan's 4-year championship run, done. Over. And that's when Dave came out, and there's the image of Hogan looking at these two referees. It's like they're looking in the mirror. Hogan doesn't understand what's going on. He can't believe it. And then came that classic promo after the match where Hulk is in the back crying like a little bitch. Oh, my God. Hogan is just crying. He's just hysterical. And he's yelling, how much for the plastic surgery, Mean Gene? When I turned around, they were identical. And it's just like, it's that classic Hogan promo where if you hate Hulk Hogan, you love that promo, because this guy, he lost everything. He lost his belt. He lost the match. And now you get to watch him cry about it. And the storyline going into the match was that Ted DiBiase had said he was going to buy the championship, and Hogan wouldn't sell. He said, no way. So Andre wins it, and immediately he relinquishes it to DiBiase, and that's another funny thing, because if you go back and watch it, when Andre surrenders the belt to DiBiase, not once, but twice, he refers to it as the tag team title. I still don't know what the hell that was all about. So he surrenders the tag team title to Ted DiBiase, and they even had, he was announced as the champion, DiBiase was, at a pair of house shows after this. Before Jack Tunney went on television, he declared the title vacant. That led to the WrestleMania 4 tournament that the Macho Man won. So there, if you were one of those people to go to those house shows immediately after this, you had the rare sight of Ted DiBiase wearing the title and being introduced as the champion. Now, this show wasn't only historic because of the title change and the twin Hebner angle and all that. This all ties into WrestleMania 4 in a different way. The show opened with an Intercontinental title match between Honky Tonk Man and the Macho Man Randy Savage. The plan had been for Honky to lose the belt and drop it back to Savage. Savage would be a two-time Intercontinental Champion. Well, the problem is Honky Tonk Man refused to lose. He has said in interviews, I didn't feel it was the time. I was still drawing. It just felt like bad business. It wasn't the right time. It had nothing to do with him not wanting to do the job. Who knows? Back in those days, those guys protected themselves. They protected their spot because a guy like Honky Tonk Man was disposable. And if you wanted, let's say, to jump ship to the NWA or something, how does it look if he's on network television in front of 30 million people doing the job? So I don't know what his mindset was. This is what he's claimed in interviews. I find the whole thing bizarre. I mean, Honky Tonk Man at that time was a solid mid-card guy. He had the second highest ranking title in the company. He seemed to be a draw as a heel. People hated him. So he was a draw. He was doing well in that gimmick. He was so hateable. But to think that he would just say, yeah, no, I'm not losing, and they would kind of have to work around that is kind of weird to me. But I guess they were going live on television, and what the hell are you going to do? So instead, the match ended with a count-out win for Savage. And what ended up happening was it altered the course of history, you could say, because Ted DiBiase certainly is of the impression all these years that he was getting the title. He may have even been promised it at WrestleMania 4. Well, to appease Savage, they instead put the title on Savage, and Hogan was going to go away to make a movie, I think No Holds Barred, and Savage would then carry the company as the babyface champion. And he did feud with DiBiase, but instead of it being Savage chasing for the belt, it was him defending the belt, and Savage was a big draw. He really was. Savage was a big success as the champion in Hogan's absence. He more than held his own. Poor Ted DiBiase, though, got screwed out of his big championship victory. So he's one of those guys, when you look back, who were some of the big names in wrestling history that never held the title? You think of guys maybe like Roddy Piper, maybe even a guy like Kurt. I know Kurt Hennig was AWA champion, but Jake Roberts. DiBiase's way up there because as the $1 Million Man, in that character, he was one of the top guys. He was a good wrestler, had a lot of success in Mid-South, never held the big one in WWE, and it goes back to Honky Tonk Man refusing to do the job to Savage on this show. So there was a lot of history wrapped up in this show and how it affected WrestleMania that year and the Mega Powers angle that ended up happening and all that kind of stuff. But that was 26 years ago this week.